Good afternoon and welcome to the Senate Committee on Government Operations meeting of Wednesday, April 16th. And we are going to take up a couple of bills today. One of them, the first one is H397. This is the miscellaneous amendment to the statutes governing emergency management and flood response. And we are being joined today by Ben Green of the Dam Safety Program. He's the dam manager.
Great type.
I deliberately skipped the which is part of DEC. So if you would, Ben, and then we'll quickly go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Senator Larry Hart from Orange County. Nice to meet you.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District. Good to see you.
Brian Collmore, representing the Rutland District.
Jillian, Committee Assistant.
Larry, who sits here?
That would be Tanya for house.
B
House.
No.
O B O ski.
Look.
And there
And there she be.
there's
Like a genie rubbing the bottle.
We can't do with it.
Oh,
Your Hopesky and
And I keep saying B.
it's okay.
the B
And
part is good.
Oh,
I asked
Like-
Larry, say, take us there.
Except it's
H-O-B.
Her, it came up with her.
O B
And-
O.
you just wanted to add Vermont.
Okay, I'm sorry. Senator White from Windsor County.
Yep.
Welcome, Ben.
May I share my screen?
Sure.
Whoever put stress relief tea here is great.
It
idea.
was given to me as a gift this morning.
That was a good gift. It's for the rest of the session. A good gift for all of us.
It's open to all.
All right.
Good day.
Dams.
Good day. For the record, my name is Ben Green. I'm the section chief of the Dam Safety Program in the Department of Environmental Conservation. And here to talk a little bit today about our position, our views of the portion of H397 that talks about dam drawdowns during emergency flood events.
Okay.
So for those not familiar with our program and who we are, we're located in the Water Investment Division within DEC. Our mission's a bit different than most others in ANR and DEC, and our primary focus is public safety. And two primary responsibilities. Number one is dam regulation. We regulate roughly 1,000 dams across the state that are non-hydropower, non-federal. And then on the other side of it, we're also state owner representatives at 13 state-owned dams, including the Three Winooski River Flood Control Dams, Waterbury, Wrightsville, and East Barre. So we're both regulators and owners. We're kind of on both sides of it. Our current staffing levels, we're currently 7 people in my program. And on the regulatory side, we operate under 10 VSA Chapter 43 dams. On the ownership side, as I mentioned, we have the 13 dams. ANR as a whole, when you add in Fish and Wildlife and FPR and us at DEC, we have roughly 100 dams, making us the single largest dam owner in the state. And as time has gone on, although we're not the direct owners, we've been assisting Forest Parks and Recreation, Fish and Wildlife more and more.
So the 1,000 are for the private dams, right?
Private, municipal, et cetera, as well as, yes. Yep. So the main reason we're here today is to provide a recommendation for consideration with regards to the drawdown. In our opinion, dam owners that own dams that could provide public safety and flood reduction benefits from a pre-flood event drawdown perspective through temporary waiver of permits and environmental regulations should be required to develop a drawdown plan ahead of time that includes things like communications that they're going to do with downstream communities, and also provides general guidelines on what they're going to do for drawdown rates in the reservoir, target outflows from the dams, what the target levels are as monitoring requirements. This is to limit chances to have unanticipated issues or kind of have the reverse of what you're trying to achieve here, actually cause a problem as opposed to solve one. And then also to maximize effectiveness. We really feel that pre-planning is really necessary for this to be a successful initiative.
Senator Clarkson.
May I just ask, Ben, is that one of the reasons that the Army Corps of Engineer dams, we represent a number of them in Windsor County, they do pre-drawdowns? Is that one of the reasons like, for example, Springfield's never flooded since 27 because of that great dam, the Stoughton Pond Dam, the Black River Dam?
So
I mean, because is that one of the reasons that this worked?
the Probably the majority of the flood capacity they have are not due to the pre-event drawdown, but probably those dams are purpose designed flood control dams.
Yeah.
And certainly probably there's some benefit they get from doing it, otherwise they wouldn't do the pre-event drawdown. But probably the majority of their storage capacity is above that elevation. I can speak more specifically about the ones here in the Winooski Valley. Waterbury, for example, we have a flood control band. So we have a normal water level that everyone's used to for recreation and other reasons. And then from that elevation up to a higher elevation is our flood control band. That's where we essentially shut everything down and store the floodwaters there to reduce the amount of water getting to Winooski. And then if after a bit, if we went above that level and essentially the reservoir became full, which is actually very close to happening in Wrightsville here in 2023, then, additional water start going downstream that would be, maybe not more than was there before the dam existed, but certainly more than anyone has seen since the dam's been in place. So pre-event drawdowns, I think, are a piece of the puzzle. I think they're probably a smaller piece of the puzzle than that original purpose. I just also provided this slide here, as we see it, some potential pros and cons of doing pre-event drawdowns. Some potential pros include it reduces flood risk and flood load on dams. We're talking more about smaller dams. Number one dam failure mode is overtopping due to a flood event, water actually rising up and flowing over the dam, overwhelming it. So if you can start at a lower water level, that's beneficial. It's an opportunity to potentially use existing dam infrastructure that already exists in the landscape to reduce downstream flooding and attenuate flows. And potentially could also reduce flooding and damages to upstream shoreline property owners. A few cons or challenges with that concept is it's really dependent. The success of it's really dependent on dam configuration, drainage basin size. Most dams are not designed or configured for flood protection. So a drawdown they might maybe perhaps be able to achieve in a reasonable amount of time before a flood may not really be as effective in all cases as you might think. I offer this pie chart up here to show the purposes of dams in Vermont. Vast majority of our dams, 58% are recreation is our primary purpose, 16% are hydropower, 9% are water supply, which are things like drinking water supply for snow ski areas, agricultural water supply, etc. You have to go all the way down to 3%, and that's how many dams that are actually purpose designed flood control. I just say that to kind of manage expectations that you need to have, I think, somewhat reasonable expectations that while drawdown, I think will provide a little bit of benefit. It may not be a few, it needs to be a little bit, have reasonable expectations to how much benefit you're actually going to get for doing this. Some other cons are if it's not done carefully, drawdown rates that are too rapid can actually damage dams. It's particularly true of earth embankment dams. If you lower the water level too quickly, when the dam is at normal water level, is the dam and the reservoir in a steady state where there's a liquid level inside the body of the dam and the liquid that the dam's retaining. If you draw that water level in the upstream down too quickly, that liquid that's in the body of the embankment can't drain at the same rate. It can actually cause a stability issue. So that's one thing you need to consider. When you're doing the drawdown, high outflow rates could cause undue erosion or downstream property or channel damage. It's really the last thing you want to do is do a pre-event drawdown and cause some damages that would have otherwise not occurred. You need to have a dam that's in very good condition, satisfactory condition, and have reliable outlet that works that you're using to do this work. Because there's always a risk that your outlet work could fail on the open or closed position, and you could have the unintended consequence of draining your entire reservoir, sending a whole lot more water downstream than you intended. It requires diligent, active management, which doesn't introduce additional human factors, and that you need to have an owner that's paying attention and diligent and understands what they're doing. The last one I have here, which isn't necessarily a dam safety negative, but it can have negative impacts on aquatic ecosystems both in the reservoir as you're artificially lowering the water level and also in downstream channel if you're seeing unnatural flows than you normally see.
You have two other cons. One is the con in the winter if the dam is drawn down and the dam can crack because it's freezing in the dam. So you can have damage to the dam itself. And the second one is, in addition to aquatic, I am you're assuming, and wildlife. Are you assuming wildlife in the aquatic ecosystem? Okay,
yes.
Not just the plants and the body of water.
Right, and some plants,
yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah. To address your cracking issue, I would say, I guess not impossible, but I would say in general, I think that's fairly low risk. I think most of the materials that dams are built of in this area of the country are not really susceptible to that. That's like if you're in the arid Southwest, there's a lot of cracks that occur in dams. That's a huge issue they deal with. We don't really deal with it here so much. So I don't know if
Depends on the age of the dam.
I guess that's what I would say. So then just some general considerations. it just reminded the dam owners hold all the risk and liability of dam safety and dam performance if they cause issues downstream due to operation, misoperation, or failure. They're the ones that ultimately hold that bag. They're holding the ball in those cases. So they are the ones that are kind of most exposed. Measures that give dam owners tool to make dams safer and reduce flooding should be explored. I say that both as a regulator and a dam owner. I think all these things should be on the table. And successive pre-event drawdowns for dam and public safety is nuanced. So pre-event drawdowns do already occur in a controlled and regulated way at many hydropower dams that have water quality certifications. Those are not dams under my regulatory purview. I'm tangentially involved in several of them, but for the most part, I don't have a lot of information in that area, but I know that they work quite heavily with the flow protection group, Green Mountain Power particularly, to manage reservoirs in a pre-event manner. So this is already happening in some way, in a regulated way in some facilities. It's also occurring at other sites, kind of under the radar. To have a meaningful impact, several days of notice is needed prior to perform operations to allow time for that controlled drawdown to happen. So I'm not entirely familiar with how always a disaster declaration comes about, but if it doesn't come until the flood is already here, it's too late. We need to start doing this 2, 3, 4 days ahead of time. The more time we have ahead of time, the more time we can effectively get water out. The risk there is the further out you are, the less you really fully understand how that flood's going to hit, and you can potentially end up with a situation where you do pull the water level down several feet. The storm misses that drainage basin, and now you have a reservoir that's lower than everyone wants it to be, and that's a possibility. And back to, I think the lack of pre-planning could result in inefficiencies or unintended consequences. I don't see a way that this could really work without pre-planning it to be effective. If we wait until an event to happen, the declaration gets declared, and we're talking to the secretary, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do where, we're trying to talk to owners and coordinate it on the fly. It's just not feasible. It has to be planned ahead of time to really be effective, to understand what we're actually doing and trying to achieve. I know in here control should be considered to balance public safety and environmental impacts to the extent possible. And it really should only be considered dams that have are in satisfactory condition, have reliable operable works, and which pre-event drawdown capacity can provide manageable benefits. Because I think if you look at every dam in the landscape, there are some dams that aren't really going to provide the benefit you may think they would. And a good example of that, we've studied a few of the dams that we own recently in the last couple of years. One is Noise Pond Dam in Groton. It was built or reconstructed in the 1930s. One of the stated purposes of that dam was to provide flood protection to the town of Groton. According to the hydraulic modeling, there is very little flood reduction and attenuation that dam provides. It has relatively large spillways, and the water passes through the dam pretty well. Conversely, we also own Silver Lake Dam in Barnard, which has several very small outlets, and again, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but that dam actually provides a great reduction in flooding downstream from the standpoint is that dam stores a lot of water and passes very little during floods. So it's kind of a nuanced thing. You can't just say no dams provide flood protection or all dams provide flood protection. You kind of have to look at each individual dam because the benefits vary widely. And then kind of my last slide here is just some proposed planning considerations. In our mind, really kind of this is a little bit of a dam owner driven initiative in that it's really the dam owner, the one that they operate the dam, they own the risk and liability of dam ownership. If they want to do this, this would really be an initiative that would come from them in a way. And if they want to do that, they want to get a waiver from environmental permits and regulations to do this, then in our minds, it really makes a lot of sense is for them to have a pre-approved plan that they put together that kind of presets out how they're going to do it. And some of those thoughts would be a few thoughts here of consideration. One is I think if it's something they really want to do, they need to do a hydrologic and hydraulic modeling of the dam, reservoir, and downstream channel to prove that it does actually provide public safety benefit. Many of the dams will already have models like this available through that you need it for design and other needs, but that could be repurposed to look at these issues. I think you'd find that some dams don't really provide a lot, some dams do, and so having this initial modeling makes a lot of sense rather than just kind of haphazardly doing it every dam. And some other general guidelines. I think one really important thing is having regulator and downstream community notifications about what they're doing, why they're doing it, when they're doing it. If they're going to start releasing water from a reservoir several days in advance of an event and put quite a bit of water into the channel, I think the local community needs to be aware of that. That's kind of a natural flow condition, so they can let their residents and people can be aware of what's going on. I think you need to set maximum reservoir drawdown rates in terms of how fast you draw the reservoir down, because again, you can draw it down too fast and cause issues. And how much outflows you plan to put out, what your limits are there, and what your ramping rates are, which means how quickly you operate your gates. You don't want to go 0 to 100%. You want to ramp that up over a period of time. Of course, your period of time is somewhat limited, but talking about, minutes and hours, not necessarily days for ramping rates, but a way to do it in a controlled, safe way. We always want to have like a target drawdown elevation that everyone can agree upon. I'm thinking in reality, realistically, the few days you really have to do this, several feet is really like a realistic target. I think we can go tremendously farther than that. It's probably not particularly realistic. And that's of course going to come up with how beneficial is it? Is that amount of drawdown when you run a major event through it? Does that really provide the benefit you think it does? And in some cases it will, in some cases it may not. And then post flood, once the dam public safety risk is passed by, I think the dam owners should have to restore back to their flow requirements. And then there should be an observation reporting requirement as part of this, so that they're clear what they did, and we can also kind of help measure the benefit of it in real time as well. If we don't know what the heck anyone's doing, it's not, maybe they did it, maybe they didn't. We don't really know if it helped. So I think that's important from those two.
Reporting to whom?
I guess the challenge with this context, I'm not entirely sure who would be regulating this. You're talking about dams are regulated by 4 different entities. And so I don't really propose or don't have a great sense for what the best regulatory context for this is, whether it is going back through flow protection or going to each individual dam regulator. There's 4 individual dam regulators. Well, there's 3 dam regulators and there's federal dams in the state. Dams are regulated by the Vermont Dam Safety Program. That's the majority of dams. Dams are about 20 dams right now are regulated by the Public Utility Commission. About 80 dams are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And then federal dams are owned by the federal government, are self-regulating. So dams are owned by the Army Corps of Engineers or Forest Service. They regulate themselves. So you sort of have to pierce each of those regulatory agencies. To be clear, I think a lot of the dams that are FERC regulated have water quality certifications through the agency, and are ones that are kind of ahead of the curve in this. The other ones are already kind of doing this.
Yeah, we had, you're now just starting to restart my memory on the FERC regulations being much stricter. And we wouldn't be out of compliance in any way if we were to move forward with any of the language in the bill. Like, we wouldn't be able to regulate those dams basically. Many
of those dams already have an operational band that they can operate in. Water I'm most familiar with, they can elevation 589.5 is their normal water level. They're allowed to go 1 foot below that, which is not really very much. And then some events has been pushed a bit below that just for public safety considerations. But most of those have a band they can operate in with some notifications that are required to do. They can operate within that band, get to the low end of their band, or maybe even slightly below without.
We can't change the band. That's federal.
Oh, but that's let's do the water quality certification. That's actually through the flow protection at the DEC.
Oh, okay.
So, but I think the proposal here is to kind of on a temporary basis, waive those bans. I'm suggesting that some ban still needs to be established because I think it's important that you don't have full removal of the regulation to look down each God knows where and cause unintended consequences.
Did you have a question, Senator Bieholski?
I do. I might have a lot of questions because dams are not really my area of expertise.
Dams.
Good section. So if I'm understanding your testimony, some of what's being proposed in this bill is already possible within a state of emergency. Like these drawdowns can already happen when there is an imminent flooding risk.
I would say, yes, for a subset of dams, they already have a water quality certification, which are those roughly 80 hydropower dams. They already have a mechanism to kind of do this within their permit. For the remainder of the dams in the state, I would say some of this is happening just kind of organically. People are kind of taking the risk that, like, I'm going to take the risk, I'm going to get slapped for environmental infringements, but I think for public safety purposes, I'd rather do it. I'm also the owner and I hold all the risk and liability, and I feel more comfortable doing this. So I'm going to do it anyways to take a chance. And and that's also happening in some cases. And then some people are not doing it because they're afraid of, repercussions.
And then to just, again, try to understand, if they were to make a plan and go through the steps you sort of outlined, they could then do it within the current law without this language.
That's a debate we're actually having internally. I'm not so sure. It's pretty, the language is talk to the secretary, work it out, kind of broad. And perhaps within that context, there could be these requirements, but I think we're suggesting that whether they can be considered, it can be kind of considered like a step 2 to the language that exists, or some of this might need to be added.
Mm-hmm.
we think it's prudent to have a little more sideboards on it than what's
Okay.
currently there.
So what I'm hearing is that there is maybe a middle space where it's not what the bill says, where anyone can kind of do whatever they want. Versus where we are now, there may be a middle space where we say, yeah, this should be developed. A&R should be a part of that. We should figure out how to protect water quality and allow for this drawdown when it's needed.
Yes, I mean, I think the bill says, specifically, the consultation with the secretary, this can happen, and
Do you have a reference for the page number or whatever in the bill?
this page, 29, I want to say, of the most updated version.
Gosh, I only have 17 pages. Yeah.
The one that has the strikeouts in it.
We have as, okay, so what section is it?
I apologize, I'm gonna pull it up real quick.
Flood abatement, we have section 13B, it's flood abatement program, is that, or is it like a dam maintenance? or dam?
Labeled, I moved the dam drawdown.
Dam drawdown,
emergency
section
flood.
13, page 9.
And also,
Sorry.
well,
Yeah, so it's 13A, B, and C, it's a bunch of 13.
okay. And you're in favor of what's in the language already?
I guess we're in favor of the concept of doing this and looking at doing this. And I guess my personal concern would be the language is pretty broad, not really specific of how, and that's kind of where our concerns come in. I guess that there is true potentially, when it says consult with the secretary, this could be what that consultation is. So I'm not suggesting that's a possibility, but I guess kind of want to bring this to people's attention that we feel this is a reasonable
Senator Clark?
consideration to add.
I appreciate that, and we don't want broad language when it comes to a specific, very focused need.
Mhm.
Have you language to recommend and share with us, or can you get us language that would clarify and make it less broad and more specific?
Yes, I do not have language and I can work to put something together.
I would propose, I can't remember who was the drafter on this. Was it Michael Grady?
Representative Tate.
No, he didn't draft.
No,
Who
the
was
attorney.
drafter of the bill?
I'm unsure.
I'll find out.
We'll find out. I would propose that you two be in touch. And that you, if that's okay with the chair.
Tucker Anders.
Tucker. Okay.
I'm looking it up online. Sorry.
So if we could have you touch base with Tucker and tighten up and improve the language for your needs, I think that would be great.
So the other question I have is sort of just a general one. Private owners,
Yes.
you are requiring them, if I remember what you were asking them to do, to come up with a plan. There has to be an associated cost with that, I would assume. How big a dam are we talking about before they're sort of like involved in? I mean, 10-foot dam on my own private property, am I gonna fall into that category, or are we talking about large, big dams?
Sure. I guess I would say dams that are, what we would say, fully regulated through us would be dams that impound more than 500,000 cubic feet of water, which is dams that typically hold it back a pond that's usually more than a couple acres. So if you have a small backyard pond, we're not necessarily talking about that.
Okay,
So more than 500.
1,000 cubic feet of water.
I'm trying to
It
imagine what
would kind
that
of be the,
is.
It's an acre or two.
it's a lot. So in dam safety, we measured volumes in acre feet, which is picture 1 acre, which is 208 feet by 208 foot. 1 foot deep would be 1 acre feet, 1 acre foot. And 500,000 cubic foot is 11.5 acre feet, which I don't know if that's particularly helpful, but again, usually you have to get to a pond that has a dam that's probably 5 or 10 feet tall and a couple acres before you get to that point. So if you have a dam that's a few hundred foot and real shallow, you're probably not, this isn't really for
Okay.
dreams.
But for those that are in that situation, who's gonna pay to have that study done?
So I would suggest that it'd be kind of, again, the owner holds risk and liability of ownership. So if they don't want to do this, I don't think they have to do this. If they want to do this, then consider the owners that they have to bear the cost. Because like one of the requirements of dam ownership is the financial burden of ownership. But it's an optional thing, as I see it.
And as a dam owner, I can say that once you own a dam that has any amount of that water or more, you everyone downstream is it, and you are under huge liability if you don't protect.
I didn't know you owned it then.
I thought you lost, you don't want to get to know.
Well, it's, is it a large dam?
We still, dam owner. That's.
So I actually think that this is critically important for the downstream, the protection, anyone downstream. The loss of life is possible, the loss of livestock, the loss of property. You know, it's just like all that we've learned about erosion and the impact of a lot of water coming fast. If a dam breaches, you're really in trouble. So I think one of the major concerns we have in this state is the number of dams that are not in great repair. So to me, if you own a dam, you own a huge liability, and you need to be investing in protecting that dam and in protecting everyone downstream, and making sure that dam's in as good shape as possible. So I absolutely completely support this work, and I just wish we could get to a place where all our dams were in much better shape than they are now.
Yes.
Because
Yep.
they're expensive to maintain, and it's not a.
Senator Bukowski.
Maybe you are not the right person to ask this, but the other piece in here that, and it may not be in this exact section, but it's the pointing to the water quality standard. And I'm curious. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on. So here's my concern. During the event, a flooding event, the water quality standard obviously is somewhat.
Slightly lower priority and
Yes, but in the time frame after a flooding event, I would anticipate that would actually be really important, because we want to get that back up to what it should be. And if we sort of eliminate that then it could mean cheap fixes that actually have a long-term detrimental impact. And so I wonder if you can speak to the references in the bill to the sort of the water quality standard aspect, or if I should ask somebody else.
I'm not entirely sure to answer your question, but I guess I can say that my understanding of the water quality standards, for which I'm not an expert, is that in general, they disallow operations of, augmented manned operations of a dam. In most cases, like for example, if you're a private dam owner and you had a gate or a stop log channel, you're technically not supposed to operate that. You're not supposed to allow what's called free flow conditions. So natural flow conditions occur. So during drought conditions, there's very little water leaving, and during flood conditions, a lot of water moving. You're not augmenting that on either end. It used to be a pretty common practice in the state, still common practice in our New England states, to perform winter drawdowns. Those have largely been disallowed for that very reason. It causes, there's upstream and downstream negative environmental impacts to that activity. This somewhat be flying in the face of that concept.
Right.
Pre-event drawdowns, of course, would be much more limited in time. I think much more limited in scope than a winter drawdown, and could potentially provide some benefit. Like, I guess manage expectations. I don't think it's necessarily a silver bullet sitting in the landscape to solve all our flooding needs or anything like that, or flooding challenges. But I think there's an opportunity to make some minor improvements by doing this, just done kind of in a measured and careful way. So, again.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing language, and I agree with Senator Clarkson that look forward to seeing, the guardrails that you want, because I don't think it makes sense to just say, no, there's no guardrails, do what you want. I also have these sort of, like, the upstream and downstream concerns around the water quality standard being part of the guardrails.
Yeah, I think I mentioned in my testimony that I think on the back end of the flood where the risk is passed, I mean, there's a couple of things that can happen. One, you can draw the reservoir down several feet during the flood, it can rapidly refill, and then the water level is going to stage up, and then just as the inflows slow down, the dam's going to return to normal flows, and that's going to be somewhat of a natural flow regime. The other thing that can happen is what I mentioned before too, which is you draw the water level down several feet, your drainage basin isn't hit very hard, the reservoir doesn't refill from the flood, and now you're stuck with a reservoir level that's too low. And I would suggest that there are water quality requirements of how quickly you can refill that reservoir, because you don't want it to shut down all the flow and refill the reservoir more quickly, but then essentially drive the downstream channel to do so. So you need to balance those things, and there are water quality requirements around that. I would suggest that would be, if the risk is passed, that they should be reinstituted. And if unfortunately you have to refill your reservoir a little more slowly than you'd like, there's a reason for it, and that's going to pass a appropriate amount of water downstream to keep water quality, up downstream.
So that's the section of the bill that you're gonna provide language.
Okay. Second,
I
third.
think it's page 10, section 13. Any other questions for Ben?
Just
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. We appreciate your time and,
Thank you.
we'll look forward to, having you, provide us with some language.
Thank you very much.
The other portion of this today, you'll see on the agenda, Wendy Mays from the Vermont Association of Broadcasters, if you remember, had a request in the bill that there were, I think, 7 radio stations, there might have been 8, that provide sort of that emergency notification function, and that they needed equipment. And I'm speaking colloquially, because I don't know what the right term is. And it was taken out by the House. And from what I understand from Wendy, the Senate Appropriation Committee has money in the budget for some of it. I don't know if it's all. I believe the original appropriation was $200,000. So her request, as long as we know there's money, and I did check with Senator Furchler, to put that language back in the bill minus the appropriations request, and it'll be up to them to decide if it's 200, 150, 100, whatever it is.
And we
So
sent our letter already,
yeah, we did,
so it's not like we're,
but that wasn't one of the requests
so-
because it wasn't there.
Yeah.
But we can certainly at least put language back in the bill minus the appropriations request. And that's what I checked with, and he said that would be great.
okay,
So I will get that done,
thank you.
of course. And,
But to your point, not seeing the money in there does not mean that there won't be money in there.
Correct.
Potentially, we just are not the decision makers.
yeah, I mean,
Is that the right way that it's?
if they can get something, that'd be great.
And-
Would you-
I just have a question, because
Sure.
this is the same thing that Lou Mulvaney's done with him to talk about.
Yes.
Okay. I was just trying to, like, those are the same.
Yeah, she was the witness that we heard first. Yep. Okay, and as I mentioned, I think before we went on to the I call it live, but maybe it's, we're not on the air. It's kind of like whatever we are up there. Teddy, the representative whose name I'll butcher if I try to do it again, lots of sec. All right. Had asked me in the hall today, hey, how's that bill moving, kind of thing. And I said, well, we're gonna take some more testimony. We've had requests from other folks to trim parts of the bill back. And I believe Senator Clarkson and Eric Foran spent some time together last week when we took testimony to see if we could come up with some recommendations, specific ones about what's duplicative and what isn't. Just for Eric's benefit, because I see him in the room. Senator Vihovsky and I did meet with Tucker Anderson earlier today. He will be in touch with you to work language that seems okay with the bill, and we'll cut what we can cut and keep what we have to keep. And
Perfect. I had created some language that I was gonna share, but I'll share it with Tucker.
yeah, that probably would be a great idea at this point.
Okay.
Any other questions about 397? We're not obviously going to move it today. We probably won't move it till next week. It'll be on the agenda for next week.
So the language Tucker brings forward will be for us to make decisions about, because I do know that some of the concern has been about the bill specifying things that are already being done. And I actually think that there are instances in which we should codify into law practice so that it remains practice. So I just want to make sure that we're kind of going through the changes to.
But yeah,
Okay.
I'm not necessarily, with all due respect, going to take every one of Eric's suggestions. That's it. Cut that thing.
Okay.
No, we'll have to be very thoughtful about what we, put in the statute and what we don't. So.
Awesome.
Okay, so that's 397, and we're, well, a little bit ahead of schedule for some odd reason that only happens occasionally. So the next item is 817, which is the charter of the town of Morristown. We already had a walkthrough, if you remember, Tucker did this. Some of it had to do with the alphabetization of the towns. And some of it was actual specific Morristown. The issue here is that tomorrow, we're gonna spend a second day on the charter because the select board member that was going to be with us and the town clerk could not be in today. So we have made room for them tomorrow. And we'll hear from Representative Saudia Lamont and also David Yakabone at 2:30 today, so in about 20 minutes. And then tomorrow we will vote on that charter immediately after we hear from Don McDowell and Sarah Haskins, excuse me. Just so that's clear. And with that in mind, why don't we take a 20-minute break? And when we come back, we'll have some